Fucked over by a rental scam? Now I have nowhere to live and broke with $5 in my pocket. So I'm Euan, a 28-year-old bloke from a small town in Lancashire. I'd finally saved enough to move to London for a fresh start. My mate Percy had done it a year ago and swore it was the best decision of his life. So, with stars in my eyes and my life savings in my pocket, I decided to follow suit. I had no idea the hell I was walking into. Percy put me in touch with this guy, Alastair, who claimed to have a beautiful flat in Shoreditch. The pictures were stunning. Hardwood floors, big windows, modern kitchen. The works. Alastair seemed legit too. We chatted over the phone, and he was so friendly, so convincing. I was sold. He said he was getting loads of interest and I should act fast if I wanted it, so I wired him the deposit and first month's rent, a total of £2,000. It was a lot of money, but I figured it was worth it for a hassle-free move. The day came to collect the keys. I arrived at the address, a charming Victorian building, but something felt off. The door was ajar, and the place looked nothing like the photos. I called Alastair, straight to voicemail. I waited for an hour, then 2. Panic started creeping in. I called Percy, but he was busy with work and couldn't come to help. Eventually, an elderly lady came out of the building and asked if I was lost. I explained my situation, and she looked at me with pity in her eyes. "Oh, love, I'm sorry to say, but there's no Alastair here. I've lived here for 20 years, and that flat's been empty for months. I think you've been scammed." My heart sank. £2,000 gone, just like that. I was in shock. I tried to call Alastair again, but his number was disconnected. Percy felt awful, but there wasn't much he could do. I was stranded in London with nowhere to go and hardly any money left. With my tail between my legs, I headed to a cheap hostel in Camden. The place was grimy and loud, but it was all I could afford. I spent my days job hunting and my nights in the cramped dorm room, surrounded by strangers. I had just enough money for a week there, but after that, I'd be out on the streets. One night, I met a girl named Esme at the hostel bar. She was vibrant, full of life, and a great distraction from my troubles. We hit it off immediately. She was from Leeds, down in London for a month to try and break into the music scene. We spent the next few days exploring the city together. For the first time since arriving, I felt a glimmer of hope. But reality soon came crashing back. My money was almost gone, and I still hadn't found a job. I tried everything: retail, cafes, even a few dodgy cash-in-hand gigs, but nothing stuck. Esme noticed my stress and asked what was wrong. I spilled everything: the scam, my dwindling funds, my fear of ending up homeless. "I might have a solution," she said. "My mate Hugo's looking for a flatmate. He's a bit of an oddball, but he's reliable. I can introduce you." Hugo was indeed an oddball. He was a tech geek, rarely left his room, and had some eccentric habits. But he had a spare room and was willing to take me in on short notice with low rent. It wasn't ideal, but I was desperate. I moved in the next day, using the last of my money to cover the first month's rent. Living with Hugo was a trip. His flat was cluttered with gadgets and half-finished projects, and he had a strict routine that I struggled to adapt to. But he was kind and didn't ask too many questions. I found a part-time job at a local pub, enough to cover my rent and some groceries. Things were looking up. Esme and I grew closer, spending every free moment together. She was a beacon of light in my otherwise stressful life. One evening, after a particularly rough shift, she surprised me with tickets to a gig of her favorite band. It was the best night I'd had in ages. As we walked back to the flat, hand in hand, I felt a rare sense of contentment. But life has a way of kicking you when you're down. I returned home to find Hugo in a panic. His main server had crashed, and he was convinced it was sabotage. He accused me of tampering with it. I tried to explain I had no idea how to mess with his tech, but he wouldn't listen. He was livid, shouting and threatening to call the police. In the heat of the moment, he kicked me out. I was back on the streets with only the clothes on my back and £5 in my pocket. I wandered aimlessly, feeling utterly defeated. I couldn't bring myself to call Percy or Esme. I didn't want them to see me like this, a complete failure. London streets are unforgiving. I found a bench in a quiet park and tried to sleep, but the cold and noise kept me awake. I was hungry, exhausted, and hopeless. The next few days blurred together. I scrounged for food, did odd jobs for change, and avoided trouble as best I could. It was a waking nightmare. One morning, I bumped into Esme at a coffee shop. She was shocked by my disheveled appearance and demanded to know what had happened. I broke down, telling her everything. She hugged me tight and said I could stay with her for a few days while we figured things out. Back at her place, I had my first proper meal and shower in days. We talked long into the night, and she insisted we report Hugo to the police for his unfair eviction. I was hesitant, but she was determined to help me get back on my feet. The next day, we went to the police station. They took my statement and said they'd investigate, but I wasn't holding my breath. Hugo was smart and knew how to cover his tracks. Still, it felt good to have someone in my corner. Esme's flatmate, Harriet, was initially wary of me staying, but after hearing my story, she softened. They both helped me apply for emergency housing and put me in touch with a charity that provided support for homeless young adults. Slowly, things started to improve. The charity was a godsend. They helped me get a temporary place in a shared house and provided job search support. I landed a full-time gig at a warehouse, which wasn't glamorous, but paid the bills. Esme was my rock through it all, cheering me on and reminding me of my worth. Months passed, and my situation stabilized. I saved enough to move into a small flat of my own, a far cry from the swanky Shoreditch pad I'd dreamed of, but it was mine. I'd learned a lot about resilience and the kindness of strangers. Esme and I are still together, stronger than ever. We laugh about the crazy twists our lives took, but I'll never forget the dark days. Percy felt guilty for introducing me to Alastair, but I don't blame him. Scammers are everywhere, and sometimes life just deals you a bad hand. Looking back, I see how close I came to giving up, but the support from Esme, Harriet, and the charity workers pulled me through. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that even when you're fucked over, there's always a way back. You just have to keep fighting, no matter how bleak things seem. Thanks for reading, everyone. Stay safe out there, and don't let the bastards grind you down.